There may be a Christian friend in your life right now who seems concerned about your faith. You have been calling it prayerful support. You have been calling it godly accountability. But what feels like spiritual closeness may be becoming spiritual control. And the more it grows, the harder it becomes to trust your own judgment before God. Today, we are going to uncover 6 warning signs that this friendship is crossing a line. By the end, you will know the difference between caring counsel and control disguised as faith. Before going further, this distinction matters because not every Christian friendship is controlling. A friend can disagree with you, challenge your choices, or ask questions without trying to own your faith. Healthy accountability can feel uncomfortable because truth does not always arrive gently. That alone proves nothing. The concern begins when discomfort becomes a repeated system of pressure. Look for the pattern before reaching for a label. Control grows when your choices shrink, scripture becomes leverage, and another person's approval begins replacing your discernment before God. Pay attention to what follows your refusal: guilt, silence, fear, punishment, or isolation. Biblical accountability is mutual and open to examination rather than guarded by one unquestionable voice. Paul said he did not lord over another believer's faith, but worked beside them for their joy. Care walks with you, control stands over you, and the first sign appears when advice quietly starts demanding permission. The first sign is that advice slowly becomes required permission. The stories used in these 6 signs are fictional composites illustrating documented patterns, not reports about specific real people. Megan was 29 and living in Dallas when she met Leah through a women's Bible study. At first, Leah simply offered to pray before Megan made important decisions. The support felt thoughtful, mature, and deeply spiritual. Megan appreciated having someone who seemed invested in her growth. Nothing about it felt controlling. That was why the change was so easy to miss. Over several months, friendly questions became expectations about Megan's job, dating life, church, including where she worshiped, and weekend plans. She began calling Leah before accepting invitations, spending holidays with family, or changing anything important. Then a company offered Megan a better position, and she accepted without discussing it first. Leah responded calmly, saying she wished Megan had waited. She added that she had no peace from God about the decision. Megan's excitement immediately collapsed under the weight of that sentence. Approval had quietly become the missing condition. Here is where the friendship changed shape. The warning was not that Leah cared about Megan's decisions. The warning was that counsel had become a permission system. Research on spiritual abuse identifies enforced accountability and restricted decision-making as recurring patterns of control within religious relationships. 2 Corinthians 1:24 draws a boundary around Christian influence. Paul refuses to lord over another believer's faith or control their conscience. Healthy accountability remains mutual and transparent, offering wisdom without occupying God's seat. Advice can guide you, but it should never govern you. The second sign appears when a friend's spiritual impression begins closing every exit. A Christian may share a conviction or concern about your choices and future with complete sincerity. That is not automatically control. Scripture invites believers to speak, listen, and discern together. But spiritual claims are never exempt from examination. 1 Corinthians 14 says such words should be weighed, while Acts 17 praises believers who tested what they heard against Scripture. Megan kept replaying Leah's words during the quiet days after she accepted the job. She no longer heard them as one friend's concern. They sounded like a ruling she had violated. Each time excitement returned, guilt followed behind it. Leah had not openly ordered Megan to reject the position. She had done something subtler by placing her private sense of peace between Megan and the decision. Soon, Megan feared that questioning Leah might mean resisting God, and that fear changed every future conversation. Here is the line that matters. A healthy friend can say, "Pray about what I am sensing," and leave room for discernment. A controlling pattern says God has already decided, making disagreement look like rebellion. Even church leaders are warned not to domineer over those entrusted to them. A peer friendship has even less authority to claim ownership over another believer's conscience in matters of faith and obedience. Spiritual control becomes distinct from ordinary conflict when God, Scripture, or spiritual authority becomes the mechanism of pressure. Leah's impression stopped functioning as counsel. It became compulsory. The third sign appears when outside counsel suddenly carries a relational cost. A healthy friend may dislike another opinion, yet still respect your freedom. A controlling friend makes the consultation itself feel like disloyalty. That punishment may arrive through coldness, silence, guilt, or spiritual suspicion. It rarely begins with an open demand to avoid everyone else. Instead, the friendship slowly narrows the circle until one voice dominates. That is where sincere concern starts becoming quiet, relational isolation. Marcus was 27 and serving in a young adult ministry in Atlanta. His closest friend, Caleb, often described their bond as spiritually unique. When Marcus considered changing churches, he quietly asked another pastor for counsel. Caleb learned about the conversation during a weekday lunch break and became distant almost immediately. He said Marcus should have trusted him enough to come first. Then several days passed without an answered text or returned call. The prolonged silence made Marcus feel as though seeking wisdom had damaged something sacred. When Caleb finally responded, he warned that outside voices were creating confusion and asked Marcus not to discuss their friendship with anyone else. Proverbs 11:14 connects safety with an abundance of counselors, while biblical accountability includes process, witnesses, and room for careful examination. A healthy friend may challenge another advisor without punishing you for listening. A controlling friend treats access to other counsel as betrayal. If this pattern already feels familiar, subscribe and stay with this message. You may be recognizing isolation that was presented as spiritual closeness. The first three signs reveal a person seeking influence over your decisions inside a seemingly equal Christian friendship. The next signs reveal what happens when that influence stops working under even modest resistance. Sign 4 appears when a reasonable boundary is treated as spiritual rebellion. This is often where hidden entitlement finally becomes visible. A boundary does not accuse, diagnose, or condemn another person. It simply defines what access, behavior, or pressure you will accept. The response tells you more than the boundary itself. Marcus had not rejected Caleb, mocked his faith, or abandoned their friendship in anger. He had only sought another pastor's perspective during a careful season before choosing a church. Yet Caleb's silence turned that ordinary decision into a loyalty test. The unanswered messages did more than express disappointment. They created pressure for Marcus to repair the relationship by surrendering independence and restoring Caleb's authority. Caleb's request for secrecy protected that pressure from outside examination. Marcus slowly realized the conflict was never mainly about which pastor actually advised him. It was about Caleb losing his exclusive spiritual position. That distinction matters because control often becomes clearest inside relationships when access is limited. Watch whether the person can hear a boundary without shaming your faith or questioning your loyalty. Notice whether they can accept time, space, and another trusted voice without resentment. Pay attention when guilt, fear, silence, or punishment increases after resistance. James 3:17 describes heavenly wisdom as gentle, peaceable, and open to reason. Christian service is mutual. It does not require one-way submission to a friend. The boundary did not create the control, it exposed it. The fifth sign appears when prayer and confession begin functioning like surveillance. After their weekly women's ministry call, Erin told Danielle she could not pray properly if Danielle was withholding the truth. Danielle was 34, living in Columbus, and carrying private strain inside her marriage during an exhausting season. At first, Erin's attention felt compassionate rather than intrusive or demanding. She remembered details, followed up faithfully, and offered to pray before counseling appointments each Thursday evening. Then the questions became more specific and increasingly difficult to decline. Erin wanted financial details, private conversations with the pastor, and every new counseling decision Danielle considered. Danielle began sharing because refusing made her feel spiritually closed, ungrateful, and resistant to accountability. Now listen carefully, because prayer itself was not the problem. The problem was that disclosure had stopped being voluntary. When Danielle kept one conversation private, Erin treated the boundary like hidden sin. Weeks later, she used earlier prayer requests to challenge a decision Danielle had made. Information gathered for support had become leverage. Confession had become surveillance. Research and safeguarding frameworks identify enforced accountability, manipulation, and pressured disclosure as possible features of spiritual control. However, reliable research does not establish how often prayer partners use this exact tactic in friendships. Biblical accountability does not give one person's secret ownership over another believer's life. Matthew 18 describes a process that can include direct conversation, evidence, and other trustworthy people. It does not describe one friend collecting private details without limits. A caring prayer partner respects what you freely choose to share. A controlling pattern pressures disclosure, remembers it as evidence, and later uses it to monitor your choices. Prayer becomes unsafe when vulnerability is demanded, stored, and turned into authority. What looked like intercession had become access. The final sign appears when disagreement is no longer treated as difference, but renamed as disobedience to God. By then, control has moved beyond advice, information, and emotional pressure. It has reached the believer's conscience, where fear can imitate conviction and pressure can imitate obedience. Danielle noticed this after Erin used private disclosures to oppose her decision. Erin knew the fears Danielle had confessed, the doubts she had carried, and the counsel she had received. That knowledge gave her unusual influence over time. She could frame resistance as pride, secrecy, or spiritual immaturity. Danielle started wondering whether choosing differently meant she was rejecting God rather than disagreeing with a friend. That was the deepest shift, because Erin's preference had begun wearing divine authority. But Scripture never gives one Christian ownership over another person's faith. 2 Corinthians 1:24 rejects lording over believers and describes ministry as working beside them for joy. 1 Peter warns even recognized leaders not to domineer over those in their care. Spiritual claims must also be weighed, tested, and examined rather than protected from questions. James describes wisdom from above as gentle, peaceable, and open to reason. Christian freedom produces mutual service, not one-way submission. A healthy friend can share conviction without demanding agreement. They can hear your reasons, welcome other counsel, and remain present when you choose differently. They do not confuse their voice with God's voice. A controlling pattern does the opposite. Preference becomes command, questions become rebellion, and boundaries become betrayal. Independence becomes evidence of weak faith. The clearest warning sign is not strong advice, but a friend whose wishes become God's orders. When their authority cannot be questioned, friendship has become a throne. Can I say no without being spiritually shamed? Can I make a decision without asking this person's permission? Can I seek counsel from someone else? Can I question what they claim God told them? Can I keep private information private? Does accountability work in both directions? One no does not prove a friendship is controlling. This is a discernment tool, not a diagnosis or verdict. But several repeated no answers deserve careful attention over time. Look for what happens after resistance, not merely what was said beforehand. A pattern becomes clearer when fear, guilt, silence, or punishment repeatedly follows your independence. First, name the behavior instead of condemning the person. Second, record what repeats and how it changes your choices. Third, seek counsel from someone independent, such as a pastor, mature believer, spouse, or licensed counselor. Fourth, set one clear boundary, describing what must stop and what you will do next. Fifth, protect your safety and your freedom to choose. If threats, stalking, blackmail, exploitation, or immediate danger appear, do not confront the person alone. Seek appropriate support and build a safety plan suited to your situation. Discernment should restore your voice, not replace one controlling authority with another. Christian love never requires surrendering ownership of your faith to a friend. Accountability is not surveillance, and prayer never demands forced disclosure. Spiritual influence can correct you without controlling you. Healthy friendship speaks honestly while leaving room for scripture, counsel, conscience, and choice. Godly friendship does not silence discernment. It strengthens discernment through truth and mutual humility. Freedom is not rebellion when another person wants authority. Write, "Lord, give me wisdom and courage in my friendships." Then share this message and subscribe for more biblical discernment. May God lead you toward friendships marked by honesty, freedom, peace, and faithful love.